The following program is a Town of Colony television production of the William K. Sanford Town Library.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, but I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round again, the years keep rolling by.
Top of the evening or top of the day, I'm Joe Doolittle.
And I'm Kate Detting.
Stories of sharing the human experience. And we are storytellers.
You betcha.
And, we're all storytellers, but we're just one step above the regular storyteller because we study the art of storytelling. We practice it by performing and by coaching other storytellers and by bringing you news and insights into this great medium of communication, education, yes, and entertainment.
Indeed.
And we've been hard at it for the last couple of months, haven't we? We've had some good and remarkable programs that we've offered to the public. We'll come to those later on in the program in terms of what's coming up. What's the most interesting thing you've been doing with storytelling?
Well, there were two things. One, there was a fundraiser for Children at the Well, which is a 10-year award-winning program of youth storytellers for peace and understanding. It's a local group, and they've written a book, but they needed some money to publish it. So Paula Weiss, the director of Children at the Well, asked me to help her as co-chair of the fundraising, and we did it by the skin of our little teeth, thanks to...
How much did you raise?
$18,000.
$18,000.
We had a very generous donor who hasn't given us permission to share his name yet. But he's helped Children at the Well before, and he came in and to the penny gave us what we needed the last day of the fundraiser. So and it was with Kickstarter, and Kickstarter is an all or nothing at all kind of thing. So we wouldn't have gotten the 12,000
either.
Yeah. But the other thing was I updated a website that I maintain for the National Storytelling Network, storynews.org, and I found this wonderful quote. Stories let us see through the eyes of others.
Stories let us see through the eyes of others. Boy, that's a pretty profound and informative remark.
And you'll never guess where I found it. I found it in an article published by the Institute for Healthcare Improvement.
Thank you so much. Well, that's a very noted national effort that was started by a friend and colleague of mine, Don Berwick, who, when I heard him make a presentation, said to him, Don, you ought to go to Jonesboro because, you'd enjoy this. Mm-hmm. And he did, and he, among other things, has published a book of his 12 plenary sessions, mm-hmm. which use the stories mm-hmm. to inform people and motivate them. And,
yes.
Well, that's great.
This was an article written by the IHI Director of Public and Patient Engagement, Martha Hayward. And she said that stories need to be used in clinical settings, i.e. dealing with patients, in team interactions, and at leadership moments. And because that really engages the patients and the staff, the family, and the clinicians.
Now, if you're interested in this topic of storytelling in organizations and in leadership, Kate Detting is a guru and a wizard of all things technical and computeries, and you've got this wonderful resource that you gave.
I've summarized almost 500 articles that have been published in the general press about the uses of storytelling, including platform storytelling, which is, when you get up on a stage, but it's business, diversity, education, healing, medicine. All of these are using storytelling to connect people.
Yep. And it's all there as a free resource. So if you're a high school or college student and need information about storytelling for a paper, there's a lot of resources there, and it would be an A paper, I have no doubt, if you were to use those resources.
Well, Laura Sims wrote me, who's a storyteller in New York City, saying, do you have any articles on using stories with cancer patients? And so there's a Google window on my website, which I didn't point out to her, but I used it and there wasn't anything. So then I just used a regular Google, that Google window on my website searches within the website. But so I just used a regular Google window and I used storytelling cancer and came up with a whole bunch of stuff. This website is not, I never claimed that it's inclusive. I just want to give people enough ideas that, storytelling isn't just for kids.
Another really interesting resource on this topic is a gathering of storytellers nationally called the Healing Storytelling Alliance. And it's healingstory.org. And they offer a monthly webinar, conference call, teleconference that has some really wonderfully interesting stories about a range of things in this same application. And anyway, so that
and they're going to publish in their journal this fall one of my stories.
Oh, really?
A story about Oklahoma, the people who responded to the terrorist act in Oklahoma City.
So there are a lot of connections with storytelling, and it's a straightforward and platform of a method to communicate your ideas and your passions, and to have fun at the same time.
Now, how was the meeting of New York State storytellers?
The meeting of the state storytellers was great. We had 2 wonderful workshops, one by Chris Riedel about taking care of your voice and using your voice differently for characters, and Marnie Gillard. We had a great story swap. And, New York State is a pretty big state, so we don't get statewide storytellers together often enough. But I think we found a place to meet in Oriskany at the Cornell Extension, which is kind of a place that's equally inconvenient for everybody. And I hope to have more to report and see us engage more storytellers and to do things. Hats off to Sharon Peck, who is originally from this area, but now teaching at the University at Geneseo, for kind of pulling things together. Speaking of hats off to people, one of the most interesting storytellers I know is Margaret French. And not only is she a great storyteller, she writes a blog. She's a semi-professional rower.
No. She's an award-winning international champion. Rowing champion.
Rowing champion, yes. Now all these things combine to form what we were talking about is that platform of kind of genuine interest that generates stories. And I think we have her as a guest today, don't we?
I think so. In fact, I'm looking right at her.
She's here. Margaret French, welcome.
Well, thank you very much. I'm so pleased to be
it's so
here.
good to see your smiling face.
Well, thank you very much. It's so good to be here.
And Margaret lives in Saratoga, and among other things that I did mention, she's part of a group of people that support one of Story Circle's open mics at Cafe Lena, historic Cafe Lena that's under renovation. And then every other month, you guys meet at
Woodland Commons.
Woodland
It's
Commons.
part of the Wesley Complex.
The Wesley Complex, and there we have a great deal of fun because we have a lot of people show up that really like to listen to stories.
Well, it's a senior residence, and it's not quite a captive audience because they do have to come to the meeting room where we are. But Betty McCanty lives there, and she drums up business at dinner that night.
Right.
So we always get a great crowd.
We get a great crowd. And so those will be on our coming events. So you'll know about those.
It's September through June, so you'll just have to wait a little while till it starts up again. And in September, which place is it at? If we
Is that
ended
later?
at Woodlawn Commons, we started at
I
Cafe
think
Lena.
we started Cafe Lena.
Yeah.
Start at Cafe Lena. I was thinking.
The second Wednesday. Yeah.
Second
7 p.m.
Yes.
So the odd months are at Cafe Lena.
Could be.
Could be, could be. Margaret, when I think about some of your stories, I think about the presence you have about making them literary events. I mean, a lot of us tell stories and they're kind of more informal, but you must have a background in creative writing or something like that, because you tend to have your stories, I would say, packaged or organized differently. But tell us a little bit about
Clearly well crafted.
Clearly well crafted, yes.
Well, that is interesting. My background is English, and I've taught college composition and was formerly director of the Writing Center at Union. And for years now in the Academy of Lifelong Learning, I've been leading a writers group, which is great fun.
With Joe
But
Peck,
with
father
Joe Peck,
of
yes.
Sharon Peck.
Absolutely. And I think I do like crafting stories. But it's a danger too, because you can get too married to the words. I think they're less crafted than they used to be as I become more comfortable in letting the story
But you
adapt
there's
itself to
still
the audience.
Wonderful phrases that trip from your tongue, and your oh so subtle humor. When you go, yeah, she meant that to be funny, right? Yes.
Oh, when I first came to the States, I think the Canadian way is not to laugh too much, to say it straight. And nobody got my jokes. I mean, I thought I was being pretty funny. And
But
people would say,
how do,
"She
if
is-
Canadians
she's
don't laugh, how do they
strange."
indicate they find something funny?
Well, you can laugh when you hear it, but you don't want to laugh when you tell it.
Nice.
At least I didn't.
or even look slightly jolly.
Well, jolly,
You don't aspire to that.
No, I actually didn't learn even a glimmering of jolly till I was well into my 30s. So.
A glimmering of jolly.
Yeah.
Boy, that
Whereas
sounds like
you've
a
been
story.
jolly,
I've been
yeah.
jolly for a long time. And
Must be a nice place to be.
it is. It's right next to hilarious. It's really just right there.
Oh, I've never crossed over that
Oh,
line.
no.
Okay.
Well, your work is hilarious, but you personally, yes. You
Yeah.
inspire hilarity.
Some of the stories I can remember you telling deal with your mom and growing up in Canada. But when did this storytelling thing become more a part of you? When did that kind of turn itself on? Because I'd be interested just knowing when you kind of realized that you could tell a story, you could write a story.
Well, I told stories all my life, but not as a storyteller. My sister says I used to tell stories to her and make them up when we were sharing a bedroom together. I certainly told lots of stories to my kids, and I was known for my famous Uncle Cleophas stories.
Yes.
And it generated its own story when I told Uncle Cleophas. Uncle Cleophas was an imaginary character that I made up. And I told the same story to grandchildren, which created a certain amount of conflict because my granddaughters had persuaded me to change the rules of the story, and my sons were aghast. Stories, there are traditions.
Right.
You have to observe them. You can't have Santa Claus wearing a
green
blue
suit.
outfit or
Yeah,
something.
right,
No,
right.
it's
Yeah,
just,
not even green, blue. Oh my goodness.
no, there are limits.
So the grandkids knew the rules and asked you to change them?
Yeah, they said, yeah, we want exactly the same story, but this time we all want to have all the superpowers, and
Gotcha.
for granddaughters you do things differently.
That's right. That's right. I know that. I know that myself.
Yeah.
But
then-
if your boys had asked, you probably would have gone along too, but they didn't.
I had more control when it came to it.
Yeah, they were her kids, so she had to have control.
Right, you got-
Grandkids is a
Well,
little different.
it varies. There's one son that things work with, and then you have a very free spirit. And
Yeah, you can't. I've never really been good at the authoritarian thing, but they turned out okay despite me.
Despite you, yeah.
I
Then,
think because
But then, to tell story as a storyteller, I spent years. I remember when you were still in the Scotia Library, and I would see those announcements, and I would think, I'd kind of like to do that, and never quite got myself, I don't know, confident enough to show up. And then when I retired, and I used to use stories when I was teaching. If I wanted to make a point, I'd find a little story to illustrate it. But once I retired, I saw the ad in Saratoga for a free matters, a free storytelling workshop in the library by Janine Lafferty.
Ah, closer to home.
And I could do that, right? And it was free besides. And she's good.
Oh, yeah.
And she's inspiring. So once I'd taken one, then I was hooked.
I never knew that. But that's how I started with her free class.
Yeah, everybody around here
Yeah.
has taken the workshops with Janine Laverty for good reason.
Yeah.
She's very good.
Yes.
It's very good, and sometimes I've even paid for it.
Yeah, I have.
yeah, right.
Once I got over that initial thing, I was actually willing to
Cool.
invest in storytelling.
You overcame your Canadian upbringing?
Oh yes. Yeah. Well, not entirely. We have our limits.
But you've approached yours. Well, we've been talking about stories.
We're at our limit right now.
Yes.
I think we would love to hear a story.
Sure. And you mentioned my mother, and I think I would like to tell one of my stories about my mother. Right. To me, it seems relevant at this time, but that just could be the way my mind is working. It was 1961. I just graduated from high school, and I needed a summer job. I wasn't trained for anything, but fortunately I had connections. My mother was head secretary at the University of Alberta Hospital in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. She knew everybody. Everybody knew her. I mean, she was a dynamo. She could walk faster than most young men could run, and she usually did. And she happened to know that the head of housekeeping was looking for ward aides for the summer, and I got that job. It was one of the very worst jobs I ever had in my life. What I did was I spent my days in a small room folding doctor's gowns precisely the same way, hour after hour, so they could be put in an autoclave and sterilized. And for short periods I got out to wash stainless steel bowls that had been used during in one of the operating rooms. They had a counter that had to be 30 feet long, and I'd come in the morning and it would be piled high with kidney basins and other sizes of stainless steel bowls. And sometimes I made coffee for doctors and nurses and cranky interns. By the end of the summer, I knew that I needed to improve my job skills. We had an old typewriter, Remington, down in the basement. And I got it out, and there was a book, and I started to teach myself how to type. I skipped a few parts. I mean, I didn't learn how to use carbon paper because we didn't have any, and I didn't want to spend the money. And I skipped the part on numbers because the numbers were very hard and pretty boring. But by the next summer, thanks to my mother, I got a job in purchasing. I mean, in payroll. The head of payroll asked me if I could type, and I said yes. He asked me how fast, and I had no idea. So I said, 40 words a minute, and I got the job. Now, the first day, he gave me a letter to type. And would you believe it was full of numbers? In fact, everything I did all summer long in payroll was full of numbers. And every time I made a mistake, I mean, he wanted not only he wanted an original plus 3 copies. That meant carbon paper. And I had to look at the other people to see how you used it. And the paper kept getting out of alignment. And I couldn't figure out how to use those little bits of white tape to fix my mistakes. So I would throw everything away and start over again. And the envelopes were even harder because I always got the address too high or too low, or it was at an angle. So by the end of that first day, I had completed exactly 1 letter and envelope, and my wastebasket was overflowing. But the boss, who was a gentle soul, didn't seem to notice that I hadn't got anything else done that day. And he was pleased with my work because it was perfect. I'd even corrected his spelling mistakes. So after a few weeks, and possibly because nobody else wanted the job, I got promoted to the person who used the payroll machines. These were big machines with rows of numbers all the way across, and I'd be in a room all by myself, and I'd make the checks for everybody on a salary in the hospital. And I liked it because nobody bothered me all day long. I could just sit there and take my time and do all the numbers. It had to be accurate because if I was off by even a penny, we would have to find that mistake. So I spent many happy hours in front of those machines, and while I was doing it, I also memorized the salaries of everybody who worked in the hospital. Well, this was shocking. I went home and talked to my mother. I said, "Do you know what the starting salary of housekeepers is in this hospital? $50 a month." Let me correct that, $150 a month. And I said, "And do you know what the salary of janitors is? $300 a month. That's twice as much." Well, my mother said, "Yeah, but housekeepers, they only do dust mopping. And the janitors do wet mopping, and wet mopping is harder." So I said, "Well, I'm strong. I would much rather get a job as a janitor and make twice as much money." And my mother said, "Well, you can't. Only men can be janitors." I said, "Well, that's not right." And then I said another thing. "Do you know how much RNs make, who have to have a high school degree plus several years of training afterwards? $300 a month, same as janitors, and some janitors only have an 8th grade education." And I knew that because I had also memorized all the information that came from personnel. Well, my mother and I didn't solve this gross injustice. And the next Monday, we were back at work. But the times were changing. This was the 60s, and women's lib was in the air. There was Gloria Steinem and Betty Friedan. And even my mother was being affected by the changes in the air. And about the time I graduated from college, and I went back to that summer job every year, a job was posted in the university hospital that had my mother all upset. It was a job for a junior buyer. She said, "There is a job posted for a junior buyer." She said, I could do that job. She says, I have been doing that job for years. She said, I buy all the toilet paper for the entire hospital. I buy all the syringes. She said, I know the order number for everything that this hospital buys. And what are they going to do? They're going to get some young man fresh out of college, and they're going to give him the job, and they're going to ask me to train him. It's not right. I should apply for that job. Well, she thought about it. And you know, her boss, Mr. Beaton, was a lovely man. He always remembered her birthday and gave her a lovely card. And he always remembered her at Christmas, and he always invited her to his Christmas party. And it would certainly be very hard for Mr. Beaton if she were to apply for the job and he would have to tell her that she couldn't get the job because she was a woman. On the other hand, it was very unfair. And she told her women friends at coffee break exactly how she felt about it. And they agreed with her. And days went by, and days went by, and she hadn't applied for the job, but she thought about it. And it was certainly unfair. It came to be the last day that the job was posting. Applications had to be in. She had coffee with her girlfriends. She said, you know, today is the last day for that junior buyer's job to submit applications. And they said, and Faye, you know you're qualified. You know you could do that job. She said, I certainly could. She said, I have half a mind to apply for that job anyway. Let them tell me to my face that I'm not qualified. They said, yes, Faye, why don't you? She said, I think I will. And then she got up and she marched herself to personnel and she got an application and she flung it down and she went back to her office. Later that same day, Mr. Beaton came to her desk and he said, Faye, I see that you applied for that junior buyer's job. She said, yes, I did. He said, it's about time. You know you're qualified. We were waiting for you to apply. We were going to tell you to apply if you didn't. Well, she got that job, and it made a difference. It not only made a difference because her salary went up quite a bit, but it also made a difference because it affected what she got when she retired. And it had a great deal to do with how she felt about herself after that. You know, I'm very proud of her. My mother was the first woman buyer at the University Hospital in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada.
Thank you. Wow.
It's still wonderful.
When you kind of changed your voice when you became Faye.
Well, it was hard not to. My mother was that kind of person.
Well, no, it was just a wonderful technique, because you kind of forgot you were Margaret, when you were listening to Faye, and it was just striking.
Yeah, thank you. But I think there's a lesson. I mean, I think equality for women is in the air again, and I still haven't recovered since the ERA was not passed. The Equal Rights Amendment for Women was never ratified in the 60s. I'm still shocked by that women aren't equal under the law. But, we sometimes think that advancements are only about, the big figures. But I think there have to be a lot of little people like my mother who find the courage to apply for a job that they were never eligible to apply for it before. I know, Kate, you tell a lot of stories about little people who make a difference. I like that approach.
Because it's in the story I have about Jackie Robinson and Willard Smith. It's documented that there was like a factory owner in New Jersey who said, "Look what Jackie Robinson is doing. Maybe I should hire, a Negro," which was the polite term at the time. And so he hired, I think, for like the office boy, the lowest possible job. And they became best friends over the years. And in fact, the former office boy said, "I was honored to be asked by his family to speak at his memorial service." But that was all because Jackie Robinson had been in the limelight. That's what this means. He stepped forward and he stood his ground.
Yeah, so that everybody else finds the courage to do the same thing.
Yes.
And I'm curious just how you developed the episode as a story, because it took place over a couple of years while you were in college, and then I guess my question is really, how did you harvest this episode as a story? When did it come to you to tell this story about your mom and the issues of women's rights? Just when did that happen?
I don't know. I mean, I think you get one piece of it, and then you think of another piece that might fit, and you start putting the pieces together. But sometimes I don't know why those particular episodes of my life are meaningful and why I want to make them into a story. And sometimes it takes me a while to figure it out. That, oh, yeah. I mean, I know that was my first real job.
Yeah.
So I think our first real jobs make an impression upon us. And the first one was so horrible.
Yeah.
But my mother was an interesting, challenging person.
Interesting, challenging person. Mothers. There's a story right there.
I've gotten quite a few.
Quite a few, right.
Yeah.
But now it's time for our short coming attractions.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. We'll be back to Margaret. The first one I have is on the first weekend in August 5th through 7th, 28th Annual Falcon Ridge Folk Festival in Hillsdale, New York, where our guests from last month, the Storycrafters, will be. And so that's our first event. And then an event that Margaret's involved with is the Not Just for Kids, the long-running, the Not Just for Kids storytelling at Schoharie Crossing. It's free. It started on July 31st with Elizabeth Ellis from Dallas, and will be running through August, and then ending on September 11th with our very own Margaret French.
And Schoharie Crossing is just a wonderful venue for storytelling, for hiking, for biking. And if you Google it, you can get directions, but it's about a 40-minute drive from Albany, past Amsterdam, where the Schoharie Creek hits the Mohawk River. And it's a delightful jewel of a spot, and the storytelling is super.
Yes. Yes, indeed. And our next storytelling meeting will be on Wednesday, August 17th at the Byton Hills branch of Albany Public Library. We ask you to tell stories, no reading. You might have an outline that you could look down at, but But this isn't a writers guild. It's a storytelling guild. And there's nothing like looking into the faces of the people you're telling to and seeing them go, that you go, they're with me. They're with me. It's wonderful. Then the third Friday of the month, well, there's storytelling at the Inquiring Minds bookstore in Saugerties, led by Janet Carter. That's August 19th. And that's all I have for August. But there's always our website, that if you find television has nothing on for you, it can happen. You can go to our website, storycircle@proctors.org, and we have over 170 stories for you to choose from.
And those are stories by guest tellers from this TV show. And there's a great reference for an index for personal stories and historical stories and humorous stories. So if you're looking for material or just looking for a diversion, we encourage you to check those out. And also there are links there to a lot of other information about storytelling. So okay. Well, thank you, Kate. It's good to know that things are going on in the summer.
Yes. Though, there's so much you can do around here in the summer.
That's true. That's true.
That, of course, the Iroquois have a tradition that they don't tell stories during the growing season because the plants would stop and listen. They would stop growing.
Is that right? They would stop and listen.
That's what they say. But I think the ones who are hoeing and planting and weeding would also stop too. So there's and I think you might need stories more in the winter.
I think there's a necessary reflection sometimes, and if you're busy putting in the garden and tending the field, it may not be time for that kind of reflection.
But in the long winter nights, you have time. A story is just what you need. Anyways, we digress.
We digress. I was going to digress with another story, but I'll save that for another time, about storm fools in the Abenaki.
Storm fools.
Margaret, we're back with you, and tell us a little bit about one of your other creative efforts, which is your blog. And I know I get the information in your blog, and I love it. It's very thoughtful. It's inspiring, and I stand in awe of it because part of me says I should be doing a blog, and then the reality of the clock and the calendar and things like that just kind of bite me in the tail. Yeah. But you found time for that, and
well, I'm retired. That helps.
Aha! Well, I'm retired too, but I keep on getting time biting me. So I stand, as I say, I stand in awe because they're really thoughtful references on your life and on contemporary issues. So thank you for that.
Oh, well, thank you. No, I like doing the blog. The spaces between blogs sometimes stretches out alarmingly. One of my sons told me that, Mom, if you're going to have a blog, you've got to do it at least once a week. And right, that's what I say. Once a week. I don't have that many thoughts every week.
Well, the stories are more than just thoughts. It's
it takes me
putting them together,
and then I find myself writing stories that, for one reason or another, are not appropriate to be up there. So then
You could change the names or localities. There are certain techniques that one can, if so people don't recognize themselves. If that's one of your concerns, I don't know.
I'll just call it fiction.
Yes.
But it is nice. You know what I love about it? I love that you never know who's reading your blog. Mm-hmm. Like, I wrote a story about my mother-in-law, my former mother-in-law. My first husband is Indian, my ex, and I liked his mother. And I just wrote a story about my relationship with her, and it was, it was complimentary because I really felt that way. And a simple little story, but my Indian relatives, because I still feel I have many Indian relatives, because once you're family with Indians, you're family forever. And not only your family with former sisters-in-law, brothers-in-law, nieces and nephews and things, but their cousins, their grandparents' friends, their grandparents' friends, second cousins. So I have this network. So they read this little story, and I found that on days it was being read by more people in India than in the United States, which I loved. I loved. And people wrote me sweet notes. But, I can look at the stats and I can see where the people live who are reading it. And I think, oh my goodness, there's somebody from New Zealand read that story today, and somebody, and people in France. And, I love the comments. I love feeling connected in a little way with the world. Although, as you pointed out to me, you guessed immediately, Kate, when I said, which blog post do you think is the most popular of all time by far? And you immediately replied, the recipe for baked beans, which is rather sobering. Because the recipe was just attached to a little story about baked beans.
Well, it's just that I knew that because you've recorded it for us, and I know that it's a big hit for us. And to me, it was intuitively obvious that people would go baked beans looking for a recipe and find your story.
Well, the story gets quite a few hits, but the recipe gets even more. One really wants to have a popular blog, I think you've got to think food.
I wonder how cookbooks are even published anymore, because there's
beats me.
Tremendous amount of.
I mean, I think I'm like a lot of people. I don't want to take all that time to open up a cookbook and go to the index and find a recipe. I just want to Google it. But I still like to look through the pictures of cookbooks. I mean, I don't usually cook anything from them, but cooking is another matter. No, having a blog is fun, and I think the connections are what make it especially fun.
Well, doesn't she make it tantalizing? I couldn't. Yeah. Wouldn't you like to go? Oh, look, someone in Bali is reading my.
There you go. It's kind of it is kind of an example of the long reach of I was going to say the spoken word, the written word, because thanks to the internet, you can actually put things out there, and people can find them with a common interest, and in your connection with people you'll never meet live. Probably, it's kind of extraordinary.
And there are people who will read it, who I don't know, who read it every time and write comments every time, and I feel I know them now because we're connected through the blog. Yes. It's nice, and it does force me to organize my thoughts. I mean, I've gone past the place where the story I tell is the same as the story I write, because the language has got to be different, even though I may sound, that English teacher background may pop up in my stories more than I always intend. But I still feel there's a difference between the way I tell and the way I write. Although even when I write, I mean, I've had to teach myself. Some people when they revise, they try to clean it up and make it a little more. I go in and I put in contractions. My first drafts are always incredibly pompous.
So you go back and put the colloquialisms.
I put it, yeah.
In.
I have to make it sound human.
Wow.
which takes a little bit of,
But I'm sure
it's a bit of a stretch.
I'm sure all of your commas and semicolons and single and double quotes are pristine no matter what version of your story.
I pride myself on my use of commas and semicolons. May I tell a little story about semicolons?
Sure.
Well, I was teaching at community college, and I do like semicolons, and I was teaching remedial writing, and semicolons were part of what I had to teach, even though there were people who told me that they just went through life consciously avoiding the use of semicolons at all times. But I had one woman who was, I understand, perfectly psychotic. She was in my class, and she was on drugs all the time, and everybody knew this. But she really liked me. I have no idea why. And on that particular day, I was teaching semicolons, and she suddenly leaped to her feet and said, "Semicolons, semicolons, I love semicolons." And everybody else in the class. Yeah, but she was probably the only person in my teaching career who responded as passionately to semicolons as she did.
Did it matter that she was on medication at the time, or do you think?
I think she was perfectly stoned at the time. She did get in trouble one time because, I was walking past she had an identical twin sister also enrolled in the college, and I was going past the dean of students' office, and she was getting reprimanded. Not her, but her twin sister was apparently getting reprimanded for punching the math teacher, whom she did not like. And you're not allowed to beat up professors. And when I came by, this twin sister called out to me and asked me to come in and tell them that she was a good person. And it turned out that she had multiple personalities, and she was enrolled under 2 different names at the college. So she...
She didn't have a twin sister?
She didn't have a twin sister.
But she really had a...
But she liked my class.
But she liked semicolons, too.
At least one of them liked
She
your
liked,
class.
well, yes. She liked my class, and she liked semicolons. And so that makes 2 of us.
Or 3 of us, depending on how you count.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have another story you were planning to share with us? We have 11 minutes left.
I think I can fit it into 11 minutes. This story was actually written by Stephen Leacock. And Stephen Leacock was a Canadian humorist who, very popular, wrote and told his stories, read his stories in the early 1900s. It's about a bank. Now, banks have changed a lot since then, but people haven't. So I think this story is still relevant. It's called My Financial Career. When I go into a bank, I get rattled. The clerks rattle me, and the wickets rattle me, and the sight of all that money rattles me. Everything rattles me. I mean, the moment I cross the threshold of a bank and attempt to make a transaction, I become an irresponsible idiot. Well, I knew all this, but my salary had been increased to $50 a month. And I felt a bank was the only place for it. So I shambled into the bank, and I looked around at all the clerks. It seemed to me that anybody opening an account should talk to the manager. So I went up to a wicket marked accountant. Oh, the accountant was a tall, cool devil. The very sight of him rattled me. He says, I said to him, may I please speak to the manager? Certainly, he said. And he took me to the manager, who was a calm, grave man. He says, may I speak to you alone? I don't know why I said alone, but it was too late now, and the manager took me into his office and he locked the door. He said, sit down. He said, you're one of Pinkerton's men, I presume. He thought from my manner that I must be a detective. I said, no, not Pinkerton's. Thinking maybe he'd think I was from a rival agency. Actually, I'd like to open an account. I had my $56 crumpled up in a ball in my trousers pocket. He said, a large amount, I presume. I said, fairly large. I'd like to deposit $56 now and $50 a month regularly. The manager stood up. He opened the door and he said to the accountant, Mr. Montgomery, this gentleman would like to open an account. He plans to deposit $56. Good morning. There was an iron door open on the side of the room. I walked into the safe. Come out, he said. And he showed me the way to the accountant. I took the ball of money out of my pocket and I pushed it to the accountant as if to say, here, take this, do this deed while the fit is upon me. And he passed it off to a clerk who had me sign my name in a book and write the amount on a slip. I was beyond reasoning now. The bank swam before my eyes. Is it deposited, I said. It is. Then I'd like to write a check. See, my idea was that I would write a check for $6 for living expenses. Another clerk showed me how to write a check and showed me where to sign my name. And they said, how much do you want to withdraw? $56? Oh, I didn't mean that. What? You want to withdraw all of it? Well, I was too far gone now. I thought, maybe they'll think I was insulted by something that somebody said. So I said, yes, every cent. And I signed where they told me to sign. And then the clerk said, how would you like it? What? How would you like it? So I got his meaning and I said, in 50s. He gave me a $50 check, a $50 bill, and said, and the six in sixes? Well, he gave me the money. And I left the bank. And as I went through that tall door of the bank, I heard the echo of a roar of laughter that went up to the ceiling. Since then, I bank no more. I keep my cash in my trousers pocket, and I keep my savings in silver dollars in a sock.
I keep my savings in silver dollars in a sock.
Yep.
Wonderful.
This is a Canadian writer?
He is a Canadian writer. Yeah, we had a lot of Stephen Leacock in anthologies
Right.
as a kid.
Yeah. I think I can remember him reading some of his stuff when I was a kid, because it was the contemporary kind of story of things with a twist, like silver dollars in a sock.
I think my favorite line in literature, or one of them anyway, is from Stephen Leacock. And it's from the story Gertrude the Governess.
Gertrude the
And the hero of the story leaps on his horse and rides madly off in all directions.
Madly off in all directions.
I tend to do that myself a lot.
I've been there. I've been on that. I've been on that horse.
Right.
Been on that horse.
And gotten nowhere.
That's true. That's true. That's usually one of the things that happens with that kind of horse. You know, you wind up in the same place you started madly. You know.
Or further behind.
I visited his house in Orillia, Ontario, and it was a lovely home near some water, and maybe a summer home. He was a professor at McGill also.
Oh, really?
And I went on a tour of the house there was just one other person on the tour, and a tour guide who just loved, our local hero, Stephen Leacock, and was trying to cover up for his faults. So there was a liquor cabinet full of empty bottles, which was rather odd. And the other person on the tour said, "Well, did he drink a lot?" And she was uncomfortable with that kind of question because she didn't want to stain the reputation of a Canadian hero. And so she said, "Well, he did drink, but he lived in Montreal." So that explains a lot.
He lived in Montreal. Well, for sure, I would explain a lot.
It would explain a lot.
Just like that, I can tell.
Yeah. Well, we have just a minute to wrap it up.
Well, I think it's time we jumped on the horse and rode off madly in all directions. It's either that or we can go dig up our sock full of silver dollars and
Or contemplate semicolons.
semicolons. Yeah. I'll never look at a semicolon the same way again. Thank you, Margaret. And we've had a delightful time with you, our viewers, because we know that without you, we wouldn't really have a show. So it's so good to visit with you once a month. We look forward to our next gathering and sharing stories of the human experience. Thank you, Margaret French, for that.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, but I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round,